For generations, World War II has been told through the lens of the victors. We have studied military strategies, analyzed troop movements, memorized decisive battles. But we have rarely stopped to listen to the voices of those who lived through those events from the inside, of those who saw hell with their own eyes. This is not a tale of glory or patriotic rhetoric. Here you will find only raw testimonies, stories of ordinary men dragged into a machine of death that marked them forever. Words that emerge from silence, from pain, from shame. Words that remind us what war truly means, far from history books and official celebrations. First testimony, Otto Feldman. The assault on Sevastopol. Otto Feldman was 28 years old when he was sent to Crimea as a private in the 389th Infantry Division. In June 1942, he took part in the final offensive against the fortress of Sevastopol, one of the most brutal battles of the Eastern Front. For weeks he endured constant bombardments, hand-to-hand combat, and relentless pressure to advance against deeply fortified Soviet positions. This testimony was recorded after he was evacuated from the front due to chest wounds and partial hearing loss. Feldman never returned to the front line. We didn't go to Sevastopol to fight. We went there to die. They threw us against a wall of steel and stone, ordering us to push forward. Every meter gained cost dozens of lives. The ground was covered with craters, blood, and human remains. You didn't even know where to step. You walked on intestines without realizing it. The worst part wasn't the disgust. The worst part was getting used to it. I remember my hands trembling the first day as I loaded my rifle. By the end of the week, I could eat bread next to a corpse without flinching. The only thing that mattered was not losing your mind. If you thought, you died. If you felt, you broke down. The Soviet fire never stopped. They used mortars, cannons, rockets, everything they had. The explosions were so close that I stopped knowing whether someone was speaking to me or if it was just the ringing in my ears. I learned to read lips. We screamed to communicate even when we were just a few steps apart. Once my platoon received orders to advance on a hill where a Soviet battery was supposedly located. It was a lie. They knew it. They just wanted to measure enemy fire. We were bait. They sent us without cover. There were 10 of us. 3 came back. 1 without legs, another with his jaw hanging loose. I had shrapnel in my chest. They told me I was lucky. Sometimes I wonder if it was luck or punishment. There was a trench at the edge of the forest. We spent 3 nights there without moving. If you raised your head, they blew it off. If you stayed still, the insects ate you alive. I had open sores on my feet, dried blood on my back, and loose teeth from clenching my jaw. One comrade tore off a fingernail with his teeth and spat it out with a smile. He said it didn't hurt anymore. He was dead inside. The smoke was constant. You saw burning bodies crawling, screaming names. One of them called for his son. He kept repeating the name until he lost his voice. When he stopped moving, half his face was gone. The Soviet bunkers were built so well that sometimes a grenade would just bounce inside. We went in with flamethrowers. The screams that came out of those caves were inhuman. Some surrendered, others waited with grenades in their hands. I lost 2 friends because we trusted too easily. We learned that a desperate enemy doesn't surrender. He becomes an animal. I saw things I still can't explain. A soldier who spoke only Russian after an explosion. Another who ate dirt while laughing. A sergeant who shot himself in the foot to get off the front line. When they took him to the hospital, he cried with joy. We envied him. One night we were ordered to advance under artillery fire. There was no moon. The mud reached our knees. We carried bags of explosives to blow up a position. One of us tripped. He fell on the detonator. 5 died. We found only scraps of uniforms. The rest was mixed with the mud. We didn't know if we were walking on earth or flesh. My last image of Sevastopol was the face of a dead Russian boy in a trench. He had a pistol in his hand. Half of his body was gone. He was probably 15. I closed his eyes with my frozen fingers. No one asked me to. I just did it. I needed to feel that something human still remained in me. When they took me away from my wounds, I cried. Not for the pain. I cried because I felt I was running away, that others would die in my place. I don't know if it was cowardice or instinct, but I still live with that guilt. And with the sounds. I carry them all in my head. The roar of cannons, the screams among the ruins, the crunch of bones under boots. They say Sevastopol was a victory. I saw no victory. I saw despair, I saw fire and shadow, and I saw what a man is capable of when he has nothing left inside. Second testimony, Jürgen Minhardt, the meat grinder of Rzhev. Jürgen Minhardt was 26 and served as an artilleryman in the 16th Panzer Grenadier Division, part of Army Group Center. In the winter of 1942, he was deployed to the Rzhev front, one of the deadliest and least documented sectors of the German-Soviet conflict. Known among German soldiers as the meat grinder, the area was characterized by static trench lines, deadly offensives, and a merciless climate. Minhardt spent over 2 months in frozen trenches under constant fire, with no rotation. This testimony was taken from a letter intercepted by military censors and never sent. They told me it was a strategic position, that holding it was essential to keep the front intact. What they didn't say was that no one leaves this land alive. And I don't mean just the body. The soul stays buried in this mud. We arrived at the end of November. The ground was already hard as concrete. The trenches weren't deep. The soil wouldn't yield. We slept in holes lined with wet blankets, ate frozen bread, drank melted snow. Every night was a battle against the cold and against ourselves. The mud got everywhere, in our boots, our rifles, our lungs. Our clothes never dried. We stank of urine, mold, and decay. One of the boys, Becker, didn't take off his boots for a week. When he finally did, 2 toes came off, stuck to the wool. They carried him to the rear. He never came back. The Soviets attacked constantly, day and night. Sometimes in waves, sometimes with snipers, sometimes with artillery barrages that lasted for hours. The sky was always gray. No sun, no birds, just smoke, snow, and screams. I lost count of how many died around me. Bodies were everywhere. Some we used for cover, some didn't even have faces anymore. The frozen ones were used to plug holes in the trenches. It was that or be mowed down by enemy fire. I saw a comrade lose his head, literally. An explosion hit him while he was carrying ammunition. His body remained kneeling, as if in prayer. It took hours before he finally collapsed. No one went near him. We just kept firing. Here, death doesn't shock you. It just gets in the way. I remember the sound of ice cracking under our boots. It sounded like breaking bones. Sometimes I couldn't tell the difference. One night I heard something moving. I thought it was a Soviet soldier. It was a fox feeding on one of our dead. I shot it. Not to protect the body, but out of anger, out of jealousy. The fox was eating. We weren't. Food was a joke. Watery soup with floating fat. Bread so hard we used it to sharpen bayonets. Some boiled paper with salt to trick their stomachs. Once I swallowed a button. I don't know why. I just wanted to feel something slide down my throat. The lieutenant shot himself with his service pistol. No note. He sat in a corner, removed his helmet, and pulled the trigger. He left us orphans. A 19-year-old boy took command. 2 days later, he was shot in the neck. We never found out if it was enemy fire or one of our own. The rats were huge. We slept with them. One night, one bit my ear. I woke up bleeding. I grabbed it with my hand and strangled it, then I cooked it. It was the best meal I'd had in weeks. I didn't tell anyone. I ate it all by myself. I don't regret it. I dreamed of my mother, her voice. Sometimes I heard her among the gunfire, calling me from the forest, telling me to come home. One day, I almost did. I walked several meters out of the trench before a comrade stopped me. He saved my life and ruined it. Since then, I don't dream anymore. Not of my mother, not of anything. They made us write letters home saying everything was fine, that the front was stable, that the weather was harsh but manageable. We lied in every line. I wrote an entire letter using the body of a dead comrade as a desk. He'd been gone 2 days. It was that or Right in the Snow. I wonder how many will ever know that Rzhev existed, that hundreds of thousands died here without glory, without names, without funerals. It wasn't even a victory, just an extension of misery. A swamp of blood and ice where we learned that a man can die many times before he stops breathing. Third testimony. Wilhelm Beckmann, The Retreat from Smolensk. Wilhelm Beckmann was 34 years old. He was a lieutenant in Army Group Center, assigned to a motorized reconnaissance unit. In October 1943, he was part of the German forces retreating from the Smolensk area after the massive advance of the Red Army. The withdrawal was marked by Soviet ambushes, fuel shortages, total collapse of supply lines, and shattered morale. For more than 10 days, Beckmann and his unit were cut off, with no contact with command. He was eventually evacuated with hypothermia and internal injuries after reaching the German lines near Orsha. His testimony was transcribed from a military medical interrogation. If someone had told me in 1941 that I would end up fleeing through the Russian forests like a wounded animal, I wouldn't have believed it. Yet that's exactly what happened. In October 43, we were no longer an army. We were a group of ghosts dragging ourselves through the mud with empty stomachs and dead eyes. We lost Smolensk without even realizing we had lost it. One night we were ordered to fortify the sector, and the next morning the command was shouting for us to retreat or be encircled. There was no organized withdrawal, no clear route, only muddy tracks, stuck trucks, dead horses beside abandoned artillery, and soldiers wandering in the wrong direction. Sometimes we fired at each other, thinking we were facing Soviet infiltrators. Other times we didn't fire at all. We had run out of ammunition along with any sense of purpose. The fog was thick, constant. It soaked our clothes, rusted our weapons. The radio stopped working. The field phone was just static. We were cut off. At night we lit tiny fires hidden under blankets to avoid being spotted. But they found us anyway. They ambushed us, fast, silent, brutal. Knives, grenades, no warning, just screams, fire, and darkness. I saw a soldier running with his intestines spilling out. He stumbled and fell face down in the mud. No one stopped. There was no more heroism, only survival. If you could walk, you walked. If not, you were left behind. It was that simple. Some days we marched 20 kilometers without saying a word. Our feet soaked and blistered, our stomachs growling. We ate whatever we found, roots, leather, peels. I saw a man suck blood from a dead horse. Another chewed a piece of his belt. I swallowed a piece of black bread I found in an abandoned backpack. It made me vomit for 2 days, but at least I had something in my stomach. The wounded were left behind. We couldn't carry them. Some took their own lives rather than be captured. Others crawled until they froze. One begged us to finish him off. I looked him in the eyes and didn't hesitate. It wasn't courage. It was exhaustion. The Soviets hunted us like wolves. They gave us no rest. They bombed the roads, blew up bridges, and planted mines under corpses. One of ours died while looting the body of a Soviet officer. The moment he touched the belt, it exploded. After that, we left the dead alone. We didn't even look for food anymore, only air. The mud swallowed everything. The trucks wouldn't move. We burned documents, abandoned vehicles. The horses collapsed. Some soldiers shot their own animals just to stop hearing them scream. One of them cried as he pulled the trigger. He said he was sorry. Then he threw his rifle into the river. When we finally reached the German lines near Orsha, no one recognized us. We looked like skeletons. Filthy, covered in dried blood and fear. The commander there asked why we hadn't held the sector. We said nothing. We just stared at the ground. I couldn't speak anyway. I had lost my voice from screaming during an ambush 3 days earlier. At the field hospital, they told me I had severe hypothermia, skin infections, and signs of nervous collapse. They forced me to rest, gave me bread and soup. I couldn't eat. I cried when I saw the food. My hands were shaking. The silence terrified me. Fourth testimony. Hans Voss, Stalingrad, the ghost city. Hans Voss was 22 years old. He belonged to the 305th Infantry Regiment of the 100th Light Infantry Division. He was one of the many young men sent to fight among the ruins of Stalingrad during the German advance toward the Volga. In November 1942, his days unfolded among the remains of factories, collapsed basements, and spectral buildings. The front was so chaotic that at times the enemy lines were separated by only a few meters. Under those conditions, the fighting became personal, brutal, and relentless. The following is his testimony, collected years later by a war correspondent after Voss had already been discharged for irreversible psychological trauma. Stalingrad smelled of rust, decomposing flesh, and endless smoke. When we entered the city, it felt like stepping into a cemetery that hadn't yet been buried. Every step crunched on broken glass, crushed bones, spent casings. The sky was gray, not from clouds but from ash. It fell constantly, as if the world itself were burning around us. Our sector was near the tractor factory, but it was no longer a factory, just a ruin filled with corpses, shrapnel, twisted machinery, and bodies hanging from collapsed beams. We slept among the rubble. We shared holes with rats that ate better than we did. They moved without fear. We did not. The distance between us and the Soviets was measured in breaths. Sometimes you could hear them cough, talk, curse. One night I heard one of them singing. I didn't understand the words, but I knew it was a lament, the cry of someone just like me, trapped in the same hell with no way out. The fighting didn't happen in open fields. It happened on staircases, in corridors, in the dark. I saw a comrade bleed out in a bathroom, his guts hanging into a tub full of blood. Another was shot in the forehead while trying to light a candle. He fell to his knees, still holding the match. The Russian snipers were like ghosts. You never saw them. You just heard the whistle of a bullet, then the dull thud of a body hitting the floor. We learned not to look through windows, not to raise our heads, not to trust our reflections. A mirror could be a trap, a flash of light, a death sentence. There is one moment I will never forget. A group of Soviets had barricaded themselves in a basement nearby. We threw grenades, soaked the place in gasoline, sealed the exits. After a few hours, fire began to seep through the cracks. We could hear them screaming inside. They weren't asking for help. They were begging us to kill them. We didn't. We just waited for them to fall silent. Food was dust. Ammunition was gold. Water came from rusty gutters. Some soldiers drank from puddles stained with blood. One found a frozen bottle of vodka. We shared it as if it were a king's treasure. Another stole cigarettes from a corpse. He smoked one whole, crying. Civilians still wandered like shadows in rags, wide-eyed, barefoot. Some begged for bread, others cursed us in Russian. A woman ran toward us with a dead child in her arms. She was screaming something none of us understood. The officer told us to move her away. A soldier pushed her. She fell on the child and stayed there, motionless. I never found out if she was alive or dead. Bodies piled up like bricks. There were so many that we started using them as barricades. In an improvised trench, we built a wall out of frozen corpses. They blocked the wind and the bullets. At first, it made us sick. Then it became normal. The cold preserved them. They were useful. I don't know what's worse, needing them or feeling nothing about it. Hunger began to change men. One, Klaus, started talking to his rifle. Another cut off a finger to avoid being sent to the front. A third shot himself in the foot and bled to death. No one helped. There was no time, no compassion, only orders and silence. When the Soviets launched their counteroffensive, we already knew it was the end. The bombs fell so close that the ground trembled like a wounded animal. The entire city seemed to groan. We lost contact with command. No maps, no orders, only fear and the deep certainty that we would die there. One night I locked myself in a basement with 3 others. Outside, everything was burning. One began to pray. Another laughed. I just covered my ears. I couldn't stand the screams anymore. I just wanted silence. But in Stalingrad, not even the dead rest in peace. 5th testimony. Wilhelm Stark. The Siege of Leningrad. Wilhelm Stark was 26 years old and a corporal in the 58th Infantry Division of the German Army. He was deployed on the Northern Front during the Siege of Leningrad. The winter of 1941-42 was one of the harshest of the century, with temperatures dropping below -40 degrees Celsius. The German troops, poorly equipped for such extreme cold, had to face not only the Soviet enemy but also a merciless nature and a slow death by freezing, disease, and madness. What Wilhelm later described was not just about combat, it was about human decomposition in every sense. I remember when we left Germany, proud, singing in the train cars, thinking the war would be over in weeks. No one prepared us for Leningrad. No one warned us that the real enemy didn't carry a rifle, didn't have a flag, didn't have a face. The real enemy was the cold, absolute cold. The kind that seeps into your bones, your nails, your eyes, the kind that slices your skin with invisible knives and turns your breath into ice crystals, the kind that turns you into a statue before you even realize it. Our camp was about 8 kilometers from the city. We dug trenches in frozen ground as hard as concrete. The shovels broke. Our hands bled inside our gloves. We slept on rotting straw sacks, some directly on the snow. We took turns standing guard, but sometimes the man on watch simply stopped moving. He died standing, eyes open as if still awake. Food was scarce. Moldy bread, frozen canned meat solid as rock. We couldn't even open it. Some soldiers boiled the leather from their boots. I saw a guy soak his belt in hot water, hoping to extract some fat from it. At first I laughed, then I did the same. You had to fill your stomach with whatever you could find, even mud if necessary. Many began to have hallucinations. They saw their mothers, their dogs, naked women in the trees. Others spoke with the dead. One man, Ritter, swore that his brother, killed in Poland, came to visit him every night. One day he walked out into the snow without a coat, following the voice. We found him at dawn, frozen with a smile on his face. He had died happy, or so it seemed. There were clashes, yes, skirmishes with Soviet patrols that moved through the woods like shadows. They weren't men. They were ghosts in white. They attacked at night, killed in silence. Once we found 2 of our sentries without eyes. They hadn't been shot. They'd been slashed and mutilated with bayonets. That image never leaves you. But disease was worse than bullets. Typhus to dysentery, frostbite, toes turned black. Some men woke up with parts of their bodies frozen to the ground. One of my comrades lost his nose, another his tongue. Infections turned wounds into pits full of worms. We had no morphine. We cut without anesthesia, with rusty knives. We stuffed rags into their mouths so their screams wouldn't wake the others. One day we found a group of our dead in a cabin. They were sitting around a burnt-out candle. The commander said it looked like suicide, but there were no signs of violence, just peace, as if they had decided to surrender. I understood how they felt. Every night, I thought of doing the same. We buried the dead in the snow, but foxes and wolves dug them up. Sometimes we watched from the trenches as they gnawed on bones, helmets still on. That winter, everything alive fed on the fallen. When we finally received proper winter clothing, it was too late. Many were already mutilated by gangrene. One man, desperate, tore off his own toes with his teeth. Another set his tent on fire just to stay warm and burned alive. We didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The commander said that discipline was the only thing keeping us alive, but I knew it was fear. fear of dying like animals. I received a letter from my mother. I opened it with numb fingers. She wrote that people back home were already talking about victory. I didn't reply. I had nothing to say. How could I explain that victory meant nothing here, that we were beyond war, that we had become beasts, just trying not to wake up frozen? We never entered Leningrad. The city stayed there, watching us from afar as we rotted on the edge of the abyss. Some said the city was cursed, that it refused to be conquered. I don't know if that was true, but I know that after that winter I no longer wanted to live either. These men gave a human face to a war that over time became only numbers, maps, and empty dates in history books. Their testimonies are not appeals for redemption or heroism. They are not calls for pride nor for oblivion. They are screams that survived the thunder, echoes of souls that lived too long and died inside long before the gunfire stopped. Today, decades later, their voices still burn. They remind us that behind every uniform, there was a trembling body, a fractured mind, a shattered conscience. That the enemy was not always in front of them. Sometimes it was inside. And perhaps that is the most terrifying part of all. This is not a historical documentary. It is a warning. Because war does not end when the guns fall silent. It ends when we finally give value to the words of those who were never able to forget what they saw.